Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Kernaghan Webb. I am a professor in the Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metropolitan University in the Department of Law and Business. And more importantly, for the purposes of today's session, I am the director of the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility. And it is my pleasure to be speaking to you today about the existing ongoing global rule of law initiatives, learning from them because we want to understand what role they could play in any possible future global coalition of rule of law actors around the world. More on that in a moment. So for those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. For those of you who are making a return engagement, welcome back. All Toronto Metropolitan University CSR Institute sessions are held in the spirit of constructive engagement. The focus is on business impacts, but invariably that takes us into broader explorations of the role of business in society, and then therefore into bigger issues such as the rule of law and the importance of the rule of law, not only to the business community, but to individuals in all walks of life, citizens, workers, consumers, and also to the international community, writ broadly. Okay, so the Toronto Metropolitan University is located within the Dish with One Spoon territory. And the Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. All Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility sessions are animated by this definition of social responsibility, which was developed by a grouping of intergovernmental bodies, governments, private sector bodies, civil society bodies, and individuals from both developed countries and developed countries, developing and developed, working together through a consensus-based process that ultimately resulted in a standard called ISO 26000, which is a non-state voluntary standard. ISO has more than 20,000 different voluntary standards, all developed by individuals and businesses from around the world operating through a consensus, transparent process. So this is just one of those standards. The actual ISO 26000 standard is more than 100 pages long, and we're just extracting here, for today's purposes, the definition of social responsibility that was developed from that process to develop the ISO 26000 standard. And you'll see here that social responsibility is the responsibility of an organization for the impacts of its decisions and activities on society and the environment through transparent and ethical behavior, contributing to sustainable development, taking into account the expectations of stakeholders, not just shareholders, stakeholders, much broader category, is in compliance with applicable law, but also consistent with international norms of behavior. And it's not just about integrating these sorts of ideas within the organization, be it a business organization or otherwise, but it's also practicing it in relationships with others. So this is relationships with consumers, with workers, with communities, with governments, with peers, as the case might be. The second animating concept for all Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility sessions is the concept of sustainable governance, which, as you see here, starts from the proposition that the best likelihood of addressing the complex, fast, evolving, multi-jurisdictional, environmental, social, and economic challenges we face in the 21st century, it's going to take the harnessing of the unique energies and capabilities of all three, of government, the private sector, and civil society, using a combination of rule instruments. So clearly, law is a critical rule instrument, but voluntary standards are also very important, be they ISO standards or industry standards or multi-stakeholder standards of all sorts. Institutions, so be those government institutions such as legislatures, courts, rulemaking bodies, and rule implementation government agencies, but also non-state entities, certification bodies, standards development bodies, industry associations, and so on, that are all variously developing or implementing different rule instruments. And using a variety of different processes. Again, we think mainly of the processes associated with law, rulemaking processes, but there are rulemaking processes for standards of all sorts as well. And that is true with respect to rule implementation processes. There's auditing that can be done for non-state standards. And then there's rule adjudication. Yes, it's courts, but it's also various different non-state dispute resolution processes of all sorts or another, of all sorts. And sometimes it's about these various different institutions, instruments, and processes all working together, collaborating. But other times there's more of a rivalrous check and balance dimension. And both are valuable and needed. In particular, the rivalrous check and balance function tends to encourage constant innovation and prevention of anyone resting on their laurels. Associated with the sustainable governance taxonomy is this set of four key ideas, taxonomy components, institutions, rule instruments, processes, and actors. And all of those are directly at play in our discussion with respect to the rule of law. It is going to take government, private sector, and civil society rule institutions, instruments, processes, and actors all working together, arguably, in order to prevent erosions of the rule of law and to design better processes and institutions and instruments for the continued proper running of the rule of law. So this particular session is part of an ongoing set of explorations led by the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Social Responsibility, exploring the viability and the feasibility of there being a global coalition with respect to the rule of law. So in no way are we suggesting that actually a global rule of law coalition is a panacea to the problems that we face today, but we think that it might be a part of the solution, a contribution to the solution. And so we are just at the exploration phase. And in that regard, we're holding these sessions where we basically explore different aspects of the rule of law, with today the focus being on looking at existing global rule of law initiatives. But the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility has many other sessions that do not pertain so directly to the rule of law. And in fact, there'll be some very good ones coming up shortly, dealing with issues such as how to combat fraud, businesses. How can businesses combat fraud, new instruments for them to do that, ISO standards, and so on. So that's just an example of an upcoming session. Stay tuned for more information about that. That will not specifically be on the rule of law, although in the background, I would suggest to all sessions concerning businesses and social responsibility is the extremely important role of the rule of law. So you see that the TMU has got a bit of a reputation for doing work in this area. And so a good idea is to check on the Toronto Metropolitan University website, or more specifically, the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility website to see upcoming events. And you can contact me if you have any questions. So this is a bit of background about me. So I am a professor, and I hold bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees in law. Done a lot of work really looking at innovative approaches to getting business to do the right thing and discouraging them from doing the wrong thing. So obviously, a lot of time is spent looking at the law itself, and so therefore I've done a lot of work in that area. As you see here, work that's been cited and followed by the Supreme Court of Canada on the regulatory offense of strict liability. But I've also been involved in a lot of different non-state processes, and I've worked with government, been an employee of government, and so on. So I've had a lot of background with government, private sector, and civil society. If you do have any questions during the course of this session, I will do my best to fold your questions into the session. So if you could just email me, I will do my best to fold your questions into the discussion taking place. And a particular vote of thank you to those of you who are supporting from outside of continental North America and South America, where you are typically patching in at oddball times of the day and night. So particular props to you for taking the time to join us here today. Thank you. So the basic message in this particular session is that we are attempting to learn about existing global rule of law initiatives as part of this broader exploration on the viability and feasibility of there being a global rule of law coalition as a possible response to what we see as a emerging rule of law polycrisis happening both domestically in many countries and globally. Arguably, we're at what could be called an inflection point or a tipping point. Given that we're at that critical junction, is there anything that we can do? Is kind of the underlying question here. It's interesting that it's a move towards more autocratic administrations in the United States and elsewhere that is kind of playing the lead role at the moment in undermining the basic understandings of the rule of law and the international rules-based order, which is somewhat ironic because it was indeed United States with others, but with the United States in a leadership role that played the lead role in shaping the international rule of law order that we have, and indeed within countries emulating the United States leadership with respect to the rule of law. So it is somewhat ironic that now this current crisis has largely been sparked by the US, but it's all the more reason for us to work together to attempt to counter that very disturbing tendency. So what we are seeing, though, is that the institutional checks and balances, which we assumed both at the domestic and the international level, would be sufficient to prevent the breaking down of the rule of law, seem to be weakening. And I think that's in part the result of, I would say, a fairly concerted attempt to, as one individual said, flood the zone. In other words, just overwhelm businesses, individuals, organizations, countries around the world with just such a barrage of initiatives and approaches, many of them with significant erosion of rule of law components to them or traits to them. It's in the face of that barrage that we're attempting to come up with a counter, some degree of counter energy to that, counter force to that. And the preliminary findings of this suggestion, of this particular session, where we're looking at the existing global rule of initiatives, suggest that they have a great deal of diversity. They're not all trying to do the same thing. They have different audiences. They have different unique characteristics and capabilities. It is kind of interesting to see how many of them directly refer to each other. and tap into each other. And I think that's an indication of a kind of a latent support for the idea of there being a coalition. But I'm not suggesting that at this point there is any particular um, uh, express indication from any of these existing initiatives that they, in fact, would like to form into a broader global rule of law coalition. I'm just noting that they are, in fact, working together implicitly or explicitly. And that seems to provide support for the idea that there's value in working together, not just by these, but by many others as well around the world. So the proposition that we're exploring is that a coordinated action by domestic and global actors and organizations around the world stands the best chance of preserving the integrity of the rule of law and the international rules-based order. But at the end of the day, it will be up to the individuals and organizations as to whether or not they would like to create that coalition. And so this is not the role of these explorations. The role of these explorations is to develop an informed position on this and to see where that takes us. So some important supporting ideas. One is an idea that I have socialized before, and that is the idea of the airline cockpit metaphor. And that is that typically what you have in for example, a modern 747 jet or what have you, is you have very, very experienced, well-trained pilots who know how each of those instruments operates in the cockpit, and they are very careful about using them. And if you want to liken that to the instruments of governing, there are similarly, typically, stewards associated with each aspect of the government process, and they are monitoring. You have the Department of Justice monitoring that. You have the agency responsible for environmental protection monitoring that. You have Congress monitoring all activities that involve the judiciary and that involve the executive branch, and so on and so forth. And they are all acting as stewards over those particular instruments that they have specific responsibilities for. But what we have at the moment is we have somebody barging into the cockpit and grabbing hold of those various different instruments in the cockpit and moving them around this way and that way. And perhaps it's good to have somebody fresh and new come into the cockpit every once in a while and ask some questions and maybe gently say, what does that one do? Let's see what happens if we push that up gradually or push that one down gradually. But what we have now is somebody going into the front of the cockpit and jerking them all up and down and seeming to actually even enjoy jerking them up and down and listening to the screams of the passengers who are being thrown this way and that way while those various different jerks up and down of the controls is taking place. So that's the first metaphor that strikes me as being relevant to the situation that we're in now. The second is the idea of the rule of law and the international rules-based order as being a load-bearing beam upon which the edifice of our economies, our societies is largely based. But very much the way a load-bearing beam in a house is doing its work as we walk around on the floors above that house or above that building, and we don't have any particular acknowledgement of how everything that we're doing depends upon those load-bearing beams. We are now in a particular time where it's time that we give credit to the important role played by those load-bearing beams, and we shine a bit of a spotlight on them, and we make a strong effort to ensure that those load-bearing beams are properly supported by the rest of the foundation and that they're working well with other parts of the foundation. So this is a time when we move from taking these load-bearing beams for granted to now putting a spotlight on them and making sure that they are operating as well as they could be, and perhaps shoring them up as the case might be. So what we're suggesting is, and we're drawing on the experience with respect to South Africa and the ultimate ending of the apartheid regime in South Africa, and how that took a tremendous amount of sacrifice by the people of South Africa. And it also was supported by a wide range of governments, intergovernmental bodies, private sector entities, civil society organizations, and individuals outside of South Africa who all came together effectively to say this is really not a proper behavior in the 20th century. At the time, it was the 20th century. And so we are all indicating our condemnation of apartheid and our strong support for moving away from it. And that we're suggesting, is more or less the sort of thinking behind there being a global rule of law coalition, a coming together of intergovernmental bodies, governments, private sector bodies, civil society bodies, individuals, and groups of all sorts to recognize the value of the rule of law and to do what we can in our various different capacities to ensure the continued support for those rule of law and international rule-based order concepts and ideas. But just to be clear, this is just an idea being explored. There's no suggestion here that somehow or other this will be a panacea, that this will be a solution to the issue, but rather it could be a contribution and a countervailing force to the winds that are blowing now in the opposite direction, blowing against the idea of there being a properly functioning rule of law within countries, and that being complemented by a properly functioning international rules-based order. So as one entity said that we came across in our preliminary research here, if this sort of coalition idea is to happen, it's going to take arms stretching across aisles, where in the past, those arms have just been kept by the sides of people working within their silos. We're working within their individual organizations and not reaching out, perhaps not reaching out because they feel that's not their role, perhaps not reaching out because they feel that there's some sort of tension between themselves and others. But as this quote suggests, now is the time to set aside comparatively small differences in recognition of the broader threat that we are facing and the need to come together, since we share a commitment to the rule of law, no matter where we are. When we talk about a coalition, what we're talking about is a structured alliance of one sort of diverse actors, and they are voluntarily coming together around a shared goal. And the idea would be to coordinate efforts, resources, and so on, but maintain all of the individual identity and autonomy of the various different component actors in the coalition. So as noted here, key features of a global coalition is the common purpose, the voluntary membership, the diversity of membership. And so we're not just talking about, for example, legal professionals or law professors, although those are critically important. We're also wanting to move beyond them to all of those who are also beneficiaries of the rule of law, but perhaps have not chosen to express appreciation and support for the rule of law in their day-to-day activities. I'll say more about that broader grouping in a second. And in a coalition, there will be some form of coordination, be that communication or particular activities to operate in a more aligned fashion. But each of the members maintains their full autonomy at all times. So we have done some preliminary research concerning the degree of support for the rule of law and the international rules-based order. And you can find that, as you see here, by going to the website resilientgovernance.org. And then you will see under the publications heading, you will see a heading specifically relating to the preliminary research. And I'd like to thank a couple of students, excellent students at Toronto Metropolitan University who assisted in preparation of this work, this research here. But yes, you can see more than 6,000 organizations from around the world. Yes, many of them are located in the United States. And of course, that makes sense because that is where the most pressure at the moment is coming, but clearly there's increasing moves towards autocracy in many other parts of the world. And indeed, there are other parts of the world that are quite a bit more autocratic than the United States is. But the idea is we're trying to move proactively in this area. In addition to the United States based organizations, we found quite a few located in Europe and in Asia and in Latin America and in Africa. And they're all listed in the Resilient Governance website. They cover off a variety of different types of organizations, as you see listed there: democracy, environmental, business, worker, faith-based, and you can see international organizations, IBA, Amnesty International, Transparency International, International Commission of Jurists, Business for Social Responsibility, and so on. So this work is ongoing, and if you see the name of an organization that is doing work in this area or that has expressed support for the rule of law that is not on that listing that we have now, please email me and I'd be happy to include that additional name of that organization on the listing here. But when you look at them all together, what it suggests is a very broad and diverse group of organizations from around the world, law-based and otherwise, are recognizing the importance of the rule of law and the international rules-based order to their continued prosperous and fair and efficient interactions among each other, both as individuals, as businesses, and as other types of organizations, and as governments, as the case might be. So in terms of what is meant by the rule of law, we are working on coming up with a statement concerning the value of the rule of law, and we will publish that, and more details on that will be coming soon, along with a supporting statement concerning why the rule of law is under attack and how important it is. So stay tuned for that. But as you can see here, in terms of what exactly is the rule of law, it's a concept. It's as is said here, a socio-political legal concept. That's a lot of hyphens, but that's just to indicate that it's very much a concept that applies across disciplines and sectors. And so it applies to all societal organs. And the idea focuses on accountability. All organs are accountable to laws, and those laws need to be publicly promulgated and implemented pursuant to an agreed upon, fair and transparent process. The laws are equally enforced. There is independent adjudication that's done through due process, and it's consistent with internationally agreed upon norms and within a international rules-based order. So you just see there's some key characteristics: equality, predictability, access to justice, impartiality, non-arbitrariness, power being sort of subject to certain checks and balances, both within the domestic and the global context. And by doing so, it basically ultimately increases the trust that we have to interact with people that we don't necessarily know. But since we're all operating within this broader framework, we have a degree of predictability and certainty, and we don't have to take on these sorts of responsibilities individually ourselves if we have created overarching structures that do this in a much more efficient and effective way for us. So with respect to the international rules-based order, what we're talking about is for interstate activities, that there are agreed upon norms and rules that are all followed. Oftentimes, those are in legal instruments, for example, treaties and declarations of the UN or of the OECD or of ASEAN or EU or what have you. So oftentimes it's legal instruments, but it's not just legal instruments, but it's principles that are all devoted to concepts such as sovereignty, respect for sovereignty and autonomy, the need for accountability, transparency, and non-arbitrary behavior, and to meet commitments. If you say you're going to comply with a treaty, then you comply with that treaty. If you say that you're going to comply with a declaration, then you comply with that declaration. And as a result of that, there's greater certainty. And so there's a number of different global and regional institutions that play key roles, and I've just mentioned a few of them there. Key roles in rulemaking, rule implementation, and rule adjudication at the international level. So the work of this particular Toronto Metropolitan University Institute project concerning the rule of law is to, first of all, create an inventory, and you see that work is going on, to develop a draft basic common rule of law international rules-based order statement and a sort of a memo, I guess you could say, explaining what's the nature of the attack and what's at stake. Take the temperature for whether or not there's an appetite for more coordination, possibly identify leaders who could take on the role of operating a coalition, and then work on possible actions that the coalition could take. So that's the forward plan of this particular project. So it is not going to lead to a global rule of law coalition. It is going to provide as much information as possible to allow informed decision making to take place on that. But it will be for others to decide individually whether or not they would like to come together in the face of the threats that we face today. So now turning to the subject at hand, which is to look at the existing global rule of law initiatives. I just want to mention that all of these initiatives that are mentioned here are also referred to and are clickable on this set of slides. And this set of slides will be made accessible after this session is over, along with a video of the session. So you will be able to click on to each and every one of these and do further research on them in your leisure, as it were. So with respect to the UN Global Compact, and I just want to mention in terms of the order here, I put the intergovernmental ones first. So that's the UN and the World Bank. And then I put the others, and I've tried to list them in an order where they all kind of build on each other to one extent or another. So we'll see how that works momentarily, but that's just an explanation for the order. So the UN Global Compact, it is a voluntary initiative. It's an attempt by the UN to reach out to businesses and to come up with a kind of a distilled version of major instruments, international instruments, distill those down to 10 principles dealing with the environment, labor, human rights, and corruption. And then CEOs can sign on to those and work towards achieving them and report on progress on them. But it also is a form. It's also a way for businesses to get together under the roof of the UN to further explore ways that they can do business activities that are simultaneously good for them as businesses, but also have positive impacts for the environment, for society as a whole, as the case may be. So within the UN Global Compact, they have come up with something called the Business and Rule of Law Framework, B4ROL, B for Roll. And the B for Roll framework offers a guide for businesses around the world in taking proactive voluntary actions, recognizing that businesses have got a key role to play in this regard. It's very helpful if businesses are looking around today and saying, what can we do? It's very, very helpful, providing examples of individual businesses and who are taking on various different roles in support of the rule of law, but also a framework for doing so. And basically, it works in conjunction with the other work of the UN Global Compact, and essentially boils down to these two categories: respect and support. So respect for the rule of law means ensuring that the business respects the letter and spirit of applicable laws, don't do anything that undermines that. And then supporting the rule of law is doing things that don't substitute for respect, but don't substitute for the rule of law, but they are doing things that are working, for example, with other businesses to indicate their support for the rule of law. And this is up on the the UN Global Compact Rule of Law Framework website. Nice little quote from one CEO: "An effective and credible legal system is essential for successful entrepreneurial activity. The true rule of law makes it possible for businesses to make long-term commitments and to invest in the future of the countries in which they operate." Very well said. And that sort of leadership from businesses carries a lot of weight with governments when they hear businesses stand up and say that sort of thing. And this is a very nice quote about why the rule of law is so important. And that is also up on the UN Global Compact B4Roll website. And here's an indication of what respect for the rule of law means for businesses. These are just examples of things that are said on the UN Global Compact Business and Rule of Law framework page. Beyond respecting, businesses also have an opportunity to engage in voluntary actions to support. Businesses have the opportunity to engage in rule of law through partnerships that pool expertise and resources. So I'm definitely one person who thinks that businesses can get together and more directly express support for the rule of law. And by banding together to do so, instead of just doing it individually, they will be more effective and will be less vulnerable to counterattacks than if they operate individually. So there's a lot to be said, for example, for doing this through industry associations and so on. And that's a critical role that industry associations can play, is to stand up for their members. Again, nice quote: all persons must be accountable through that. And there's many examples of businesses contributing to the rule of law. Related to the UN Global Compact's B4Roll framework is Sustainable Development Goal 16 in the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which specifically deals with strengthening our institutions, focusing on promoting peaceful and inclusive societies and so on. And SDG 16 has specific targets, including reducing violence, fighting corruption, which is highly related to promoting the rule of law, and also specifically promoting the rule of law. And so the UN Global Compact is working with and in conjunction with SDG 16 to further their B4Roll business for rule of law objectives. And they have that's just an example. They have a transformational governance corporate toolkit. Here's some suggestions as to what you can do as an individual business, assess your progress, identify gaps, engage in thought leadership. There are issue briefs that are available on the UNGC SDG 16 Transformational Governance Corporate Toolkit website of briefs developed by industry experts on various different subset ideas. So the World Bank also has got a global program on justice and the rule of law, and they've been doing this for more than 25 years, 800 projects around the world. The focus really is on developing countries up until now, but the categories and the work is very relevant to everything we're talking about here today. And as you see here, focuses on developing countries, but I think in the current situation, a lot of this is directly relevant in developed countries as well. So operational work, directly working with governments, knowledge sharing, partnerships, measuring and assessment. So this is getting into the information side of things, which is really important. It's like having on the dashboard, you can see when you're running low on gas or you're running low on oil or tires are low on your tires or whatever. So having these sorts of dashboard indicators is critically important for measuring from year to year. What is happening? Where do we see erosions? Where do we see improvements? That sort of thing. So there's also the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index, and this is a really good example of an information project. They've come up with this Rule of Law Index, which is, as you see here, it's a comprehensive data-driven assessment tool. So what's really terrific about this is that it allows individuals and businesses and civil society organizations, as well as countries and intergovernmental bodies, to take a look at how individual countries are doing across a range of different factors, such as corruption, openness of government, fundamental rights, effectiveness of justice systems, and so on, in a quantifiable way. So comparisons between countries is possible and tracking changes over time. So this is highly useful in providing the evidence base to support why we're in a situation of increasing urgency. So the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index is fantastically useful in that regard. And they draw on a very extensive data collection, both surveys and of households, as well as legal practitioners, and very valuable. As you can see, more than 140 countries and jurisdictions covered. And I highly encourage everyone to take a look at their individual countries or countries that they're interested in to see how well they're doing across the range of dimensions associated with the rule of law. And frankly, just this way of dividing up the rule of law into constraints on government powers, absence of corruption, openness of government, fundamental rights, that in itself is also a useful intellectual contribution. As is the Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. So Transparency International is focusing on one particular load-bearing plank that's right there beside the rule of law, and that is corruption. So you really can't have an effective rule of law operating if you have widespread corruption. And so the objective of Transparency International, and I should be full disclosure here, I am on the board. I'm sorry, I'm on the legal committee of Transparency International Canada. I was on the board. And I should mention as well that I have worked for the UN Global Compact, but again, not presently. So, but at any rate, coming back to Transparency International, they are an excellent civil society organization that is keeping feet to the fire in terms of putting in place the international treaties, and then ensuring that those treaties are implemented pertaining to bribery and addressing bribery and corruption of public officials, and ensuring that that there's enforcement and constant improvement, continuous improvement of the existing laws that we have. And so one of the things that they have done since 1995, Transparency International has done, is this Corruption Perceptions Index. And it is another way in which we can gauge from one year to the next, comparing individual countries in terms of, are they improving or are they not improving, but also comparing one country to another. And in fact, I would suggest that this particular initiative, the Corruption Perception Index, has been a thorn in the side of particularly those countries who rank very, very poorly. It's a source of shame and embarrassment. And on the other hand, the countries who are doing well boast about how high they are, or whether or not they've gone up in the perception index from one year to the next. So this is a really significant additional information piece supporting the rule of law undertaken by a very important civil society organization. So this is just more about how it operates on a scale of 0 to 100. Very clean is 100. 0 is highly corrupt. Very interesting to take a look at that and to see the changes from year to year and from country to country. Then there's the LexisNexis Rule of Law Foundation, and you can see it's a nonprofit organization established to advance the rule of law globally, concentrating on transparency, access to legal remedy, equal treatment under the law, and independent judiciaries. And that one of the things that they have done is something called the LexisNexis Rule of Law Impact Tracker. And so this is another example, like the World Justice Index and the Transparency International Corruptions Index, that is providing a dashboard indicator of how well are we doing from one year to another. So it's another part of this evidence base. And you'll note that it uses data from the World Justice Project, the World Bank, and Transparency International. And so this is an example of what I'm talking about, this kind of implicit recognition that by working together, we can be more effective than if we work independently. Because each of these initiatives takes on, I would suggest, a unique role. And but by drawing on each other, they're more effective because they don't have to take on those other roles. Other organizations are taking on those other roles. So this really is, to my mind, making the case for why a coalition, which is a coordinated response, has a lot to be said for it. But I'm not suggesting, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that any of these existing initiatives that we're looking at here today have indicated support for a rule of law coalition. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that they're doing excellent work, that they are in fact interconnecting, as you see here. And I would suggest that provides support for the idea that an even more explicit type of coordination and interconnection among these sorts of entities, be they local, be they national, or be they regional, or be they international, I think could potentially be quite effective. Then we have the International Bar Association, which is the leading global organization for the legal profession, and has been that way since 1947. And as you can see there, over 80,000 individual lawyers, 190 bar associations across 170 countries. It's got two major divisions, and they have, within those two divisions, they have a particular group called the Rule of Law Forum. And as you see, given the responsibility to provoke, urge, and assist the membership of the IBA in supporting and promoting the rule of law. they have coming up, and they do every year. There's an International Bar Association conference, annual conference every year. The one coming up this year is in Toronto in November. And there always is a day set aside in this International Bar Association conference, bringing together legal professionals from around the world. There always is a day devoted to the rule of law. And so, as a somebody located here in Toronto, this is certainly I've circled the calendar, the date of the calendar for this coming up in November. Then there's the American Bar Association, which is doing some amazing work in this area. And you can see the American Bar Association is a very, old organization, started in 1878. Although it's the American Bar Association, it has tremendous reach around the world and does a lot of work with respect to the rule of law. And as you'll see here, this is on the ABA website front page right now. The ABA is fighting for the rule of law. Join the fight. Our judicial system, we have cherished, is at risk. The ABA is fighting for the rule of law. We're fighting for the justice system. We're fighting for the legal profession. We're fighting for you. And a June 16 caption is that the ABA, one of the things they're doing is they're filing a lawsuit to halt government intimidation of lawyers and law firms. So that's just an example of one of the things that the ABA is doing now. But they have a rule of law initiative, and that was established, ROLI, they call it, ABA ROLI, in 2007 to consolidate 5 overseas law programs. And its idea is to promote justice, economic opportunity, human dignity through the rule of law. I would suggest that its focus has been on other countries of the world. And that's just looking at, for example, it's saying here that it consolidated its 5 overseas rule of law programs. But as you see from the front page of the website, ABA website right now, they are fighting for all lawyers everywhere for the preserving of the rule of law, strengthening legal institutions, supporting legal professionals, promoting human rights, and fostering public understanding, supporting access to justice, human rights, anti-corruption, public integrity, criminal law reform, anti-human trafficking, and so on. A lot of excellent work going on by the ABA. And finally, we have an example of an individual university establishing the Bingham Center for the Rule of Law. That is just an example of how an individual university can create an entity specifically focusing on this issue. And they're doing great work, research and conferences and so on. And I highly encourage you to click on their website and see the work that they're doing. So in conclusion, what I'm suggesting here is that these existing global rule of law initiatives take a variety of different forms. Some of them are focusing on particular activities. For example, you saw with the ABA, they're bringing lawsuits against the American government at the moment to challenge some attacks being made on law firms. But in addition to that, there are also more broad-based informational initiatives of one sort or another. And what I found to be very interesting is there's very practical information about what individual, for example, businesses can do. And there's also practical information for what others can do. Then there's work that focuses on particular issues like corruption. And then there's work that's going on, which is evidence-based, that's assisting us in understanding where are the erosions taking place, but also allowing us to track progress and backsliding and to compare different jurisdictions around the world. And fascinating to see how these entities that, and I'm really just being selective in the ones that I've got here, how they are all actually, many of them are drawing on the work of each other to do their own work. And I think, to me, that is the sort of evidence that there is more that can be done by explicitly working together as a coalition. But we will see as to whether or not a global rule of law coalition will happen, whether or not it'll be considered to be a good idea. It's going to take individuals and organizations standing up and agreeing to work together, and it's going to take some agreeing to take on leadership positions. So stay tuned for more information to be provided on the TMU CSR Institute webpage concerning upcoming discussions such as this one here, but also to discuss progress with respect to draft rule of law statements that can be drawn on by others, to see the work of others, that sort of thing. All of that is accessible by going to the TMU CSR Institute webpage, and in turn to the resilientgovernance.org website, where a lot of the more granular research can be found. So thank you very much. I hope you all have a great weekend, and please feel free to reach out for any questions that you have or suggestions for forward progress. Thank you very much.
Have a good day, Kernaghan.
Thanks, Luke. You too.